Everybody, it's great to meet all of you. What an interesting group. I did not realize that there was such a group until I was contacted by Rami. So thank you all for having me here today. So my background. So I'm at the University of California, San Francisco, so UCSF. I've been there since 2000. My Interestingly, my background did not begin as health. I was a graduate of the UC Irvine School of Social Ecology as an undergrad, and then I went to graduate school to get my doctorate in education. And my plan was to work in the kindergarten through 12th grade, particularly in the 7th grade intersection, working with girls in math and science. Because when I graduated with a degree in, with a focus on the environment, there were really no positions or jobs that really lent themselves to doing this kind of work. But I ended up working at a medical school. I came to UCSF in 2000 because they wanted to grow the School of Medicine wanted to grow their education enterprise. They wanted to become much stronger in how they educated and the kind of research they produced. And sort of at that point in my career really took two sort of parallel tracks. I continued to do research and really understand how inequitable medicine was and how the policies and procedures actually do leave out many groups and how that could be fixed. So what were the ways to fix that? So that was one path of our program of research I ran. And the other one was really beginning to understand how health was being impacted by climate change and the important role of education in bringing people on board and helping them understand what was happening and how it was going to affect their own health, and also really in helping prepare physicians and other healthcare professionals for how they work with patients to help make them aware how they can protect themselves when climate events are happening. And then in 2014, I got a grant with a colleague that I was put together with at random to run a University of California-wide training for all of the professors who were doing some work in health and sustainability or climate change and sustainability, to really be able to educate them how they can bring that into their teaching, because many of them were not, like it was just not an area that folks were thinking about. And in that process, this colleague that I was put together with, we became good friends. And as the state of California has really been deeply impacted by all sorts of climate events, we one day our children were out of school because of the wildfires. And it was so intense that we couldn't even have them leave the house. We said that we've got to do something about it. And that was when we founded this University of California-wide Center for Climate Health and Equity. And I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end of my talk. But really, we are a 10-campus, 6 healthcare system, a group that brings together the entire health dialogue on climate change, which doesn't get a lot of attention. You hear a lot about everything else, but I think there is research that shows that only 5% of funding and 5% of overall dialogue in the media and otherwise really focuses on health around climate change. So with guidance from Diego and others on the call, I have put together a short presentation, which I hope gives you sort of a lay of the land of what this area is and what are the solutions. So I won't go into detailed solutions because I realize like that's not what we're here to talk about, but just to give you a sense of the kinds of things that people are thinking about, like how does health come into this conversation on solutions? I'll talk to you a little bit about the center so you have a sense of what it is. And of course, if you ever know anybody who wants to do work at the intersection of climate change and health, please send them along to us. And then we'll talk a little bit about individual choice and the roles that we play in this. And I'm happy to answer any questions while I'm beginning to project this. And then, as Christina had said, because I won't be able to see you very well while I'm in this view, if you do have a question, just please feel free to interrupt me at any time. And if you do have a question, just put your Zoom hand up and you'll move up to the top of my screen and then I'll know that you have your hand up. All right. Okay, so before we start, I actually want to talk a little bit about this photo and a personal story. So like I mentioned, that my colleague and I talked a lot about the impact on our children's lives, but back in October of 2019, so well into the time where California's climate had really become very difficult. My family was excited to drive to Los Angeles for a visit. And of course, you are familiar with sort of that drive on the 5 freeway where there's this like high summit point where you're coming from San Francisco to LA and you see Los Angeles become visible. And it usually indicates like the end of this long drive between San Francisco, LA. And we arrived at the top of the summit and we saw this orange glow in the distance. And what we didn't realize was that we were driving towards a fire. It was called the Sylmar Fire that year, which actually we didn't even realize, but we were going to be in that fire very soon. It was on both sides of the 5 freeway. It was burning. There were flames flying at the car, and visibility through the smoke was almost none. So we, along with all of the other cars that you see in this picture, were barely moving. And there was a pretty significant amount of time where we thought we would be engulfed along with the other cars in this fire. And we were so sort of engrossed in thinking about how we're going to get through this that we didn't realize that our 13-year-old was crying hysterically, thinking that she was not going to make it out alive. We did make it through. The fire was eventually put out, but my child could not sleep that night or the nights that ensued. And she's now almost 18. And between June and November, she continues to have anxiety when there's a heat wave announcement, which we didn't have too many this year, but we did have one. And the fear continues to impact her and many other young people, where 152 out of 196 documented countries saw an increase in the annual daily population exposure to wildfires. So we're looking at this being more global. And so, the 2019 Lancet Countdown notes, and I quote, that the life of every child born today will be profoundly affected by climate change. And without accelerated intervention, this new era will come to define the health of people at every stage of their lives. And I do apologize if I sound congested. It is allergies. So just know that it's, I don't have a cold or anything. It's just a little stuffy. So I don't think that I do need to tell all of you how dire the situation is. The projections of the widespread impacts of climate change are really made in terms of decades now. We know that there will be 200 climate migrants by the year 2050. We're working on a project right now with UC Berkeley that's going to really focus on climate migration and climate refugees. But we're looking at about 1 out of every 45 people in the world will be displaced by climate change. We know there's an increase in global hunger because of climate change. So 1 out of 9 people in the world are hungry, and that climate change is going to, make that worse by mid-century, about 50% worse. As much as 1/3 of the world population, so up to 3 billion people, will be living in dangerous extreme heat. By 2070, there are some parts of the world that have already hit about 140 to 150 degrees. And it's estimated that climate change will reduce global economic output by 11 to 14% by mid-century. So that really accounts for about a loss of $23 trillion by that time. And this particular model that you see here is the model that a lot of us who work in the climate change world really ascribe to, because it's such a cohesive model of thinking about how we have to worry about and think about climate change and health. But this model, which is the planetary health model, really asserts that the changes that result from our human action, so what we're calling the anthropogenic change, has outstripped the resources available from the only habitable planet that we know. And these human activities are driving fundamental change at a scale that has never existed in the history of our species. And Dr. Sam Myers of the Planetary Health Alliance put together this schematic to show how this disruption of our planet, its natural systems, is shaping our health. And so what you see here with the first sort of arrow is that you've got the human activity, so like our consumption patterns that are really underlying the change drivers of fundamental sort of ecological changes. And then the ecological changes or drivers that you see in that second arrow, including climate change, biodiversity loss, these drivers interact with others in complex ways, and they kind of amplify and they worsen the impacts. And then in this third arrow, you see sort of the proximate causes that alter the quality of the air we breathe, the water we have access to, the food we produce. And these are changing environmental conditions that also shape our exposures and outcomes to things like infectious diseases and natural hazards, which can lead to injuries. And then mediating factors, which is sort of this fourth arrow, such as governance, wealth, shape how populations will affect or are impacting the effects of disrupted natural systems. And really, finally, these changes result in affecting every dimension of our health and well-being that you see sort of in that last circle. And I just want to take a quick look at this sort of ecological drivers in the middle to sort of help you understand that it's not really, climate change is one component of it, but there's a lot more to it. And that's where we see sort of the interaction. So, our ecological footprint is huge. Our consumption of fossil fuels has increased by 550% since 1950. We are using nearly half of our accessible fresh water and about half of our planet's livable surface to grow our food. We have dammed about 60% of our rivers, and we've cleared half of our temperate and tropical forest. And species extinction rates are about 1,000 times higher than baseline rates. So you see that this all kind of, you've got multiple things going on at the same time that are driven by different causes. And these ecological drivers are impacting every dimension of human health and well-being that you see listed here, from malnutrition, increase in infectious diseases that you would normally see only in certain parts of the world, but now have traveled to other parts of the world. Things like mental health, injuries, and premature death. And I'm going to go through very quickly some of these health impacts so you have a sense of sort of the actual, real sort of transition into healthcare. So one thing we're seeing a lot of in California, and we're seeing this throughout the world actually, is extreme heat. It's responsible for more deaths than in the US than all other weather disasters combined. And these harmful health effects of heat are well documented. Really kind of see mild discomfort, heat stress, heat stroke. And then, of course, if there are pre-existing health conditions like chronic disease or mental health, we're seeing that those are exacerbated because of heat. From 2000 to 2018, the heat wave exposures among the elderly increased by almost 60%. And globally, increasing average temperatures means that the average temperature on record of hot weather is becoming sort of hotter and hotter every year. I won't go into wildfires, but deep impact really, we know that wildfire smoke is linked to premature mortality, poor pregnancy and neonatal outcomes, asthma, of course, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and even more recently, pretty strong evidence that wildfire smoke is linked strongly to neurocognitive decline and dementia. And then, of course, we know that mosquitoes, like I was speaking about infectious disease, like mosquitoes kill about 1 million people a year from things like malaria, West Nile virus. And as we look at sort of the spread, we're seeing that with climate and weather changes, that the geographic range of the mosquito and those illnesses is moving to places where it hasn't existed before. And then the regions of the world with the highest prevalence of hunger, like Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America, are also most vulnerable to climate threats, as you see sort of in the orange and red colors that represent both high hunger and climate vulnerability areas throughout the world. And so I also want to just underscore that there's no understanding of this climate and health crisis that would not be complete without acknowledging how it drives significant health disparities. The most vulnerable regions and populations throughout the world are at most risk for climate exposures, including areas that already have high levels of food insecurity, poverty, and large disease burdens. And these vulnerable communities around the world are the most susceptible to climate risks, including migrants, people of color, the elderly, and children in particular. So this is what we call the climate gap, which is basically that the climate change intersects with existing structural injustices to exacerbate already existing disparities, with those who contribute the least to greenhouse gas emissions to suffer sort of first and worst from its harmful effects. And that's what we usually call the climate gap. And these two maps kind of show you how glaring this climate gap can be. On the bottom left, we see that the countries with the highest per capita carbon dioxide emissions, so what we call the greatest consumers, like the United States, Canada, Australia, and Russia, have the lowest mortality rates linked to climate change, and that's what you see in the top right map. Meanwhile, the areas with the lowest per capita emissions, such as South America and Africa, suffer some of the highest climate-related mortality rates. So we see that, for example, with heat. We know that in Los Angeles, African-American communities are twice as likely to die from heat waves compared to other residents. Agricultural workers are at 35 times more risk. They did a study of like 100 American cities where they looked at formerly red line neighborhoods, which are now 5 degrees hotter on average in the summer. And that's because those neighborhoods have less access to air conditioning. They have fewer trees. Trees are super critical for health. And they have more paved surfaces that trap and radiate heat. And that's what's known as the heat island effect, which really has an impact on health. Same thing with wildfires, significant distribution across different populations, particularly when you think about homes where the homes are not properly insulated and wildfire smoke can seep in easily. And then also, even with natural hazards. So the climate gap has emerged in extreme weather events like hurricanes and flooding. And I'm only focusing on the US extreme events in this slide, but there have been so many throughout the world where have included disparities in injury, fatality rates, and long-term economic impacts, such as displacement and livelihood. And so I'm going to stop with sort of the bad news, but I want to turn now to the good news. But before I do that, I want to see if there were any questions about anything that I talked about that wasn't clear.
I just need the good news.
And okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about solutions, and solutions that are large scale, but also solutions that are individual. There is a lot that we can do in how we try to tackle climate change and how it's affecting human health and well-being. And I have to say that this focus on human health is a very powerful focus. That's why when I mentioned earlier that it doesn't receive as much media attention as it should, I think it could receive a lot more, and that actually could really be a source of movement and change. But according to the Lancet Commission on Health and Climate Change, acting on climate change can be the greatest global health opportunity in the 21st century. This is because we know that climate solutions have a lot of critical health co-benefits. So, for example, just the idea of decreasing fossil fuel emissions by driving less. And I know I realize for those of you who reside in Europe, this is really much less of an issue. But just driving less, decreases the 7 million deaths a year attributed to air pollution and the 5 million deaths a year linked to physical inactivity. So there's a real synergy there when you think about that sort of change. The health sector has a huge role to play here. So some of you are working in the health sector, and there has been a lot of movement in the health sector's action on climate, but we do need to be doing more than we currently are. The Department of Health and Human Services has put forward sort of these 8 critical roles that the health sector can think about as they're working towards climate change solutions. And these are very simple things like advancing knowledge on climate health equity links, building climate justice solutions, and thinking about a sort of a climate-ready health workforce. And I won't have a chance to go through all the solutions here, but a couple of quick solutions that I thought I would show sort of from more elaborate to simple. But really, this is one that's been working very well. It's a more elaborate one that has really brought together multiple communities. It's a regenerative ocean farming intervention that actually improves health and livelihood. So basically, it's an aquaculture that sort of uses a vertical approach to diversify what can be harvested from the ocean. And as you see in this picture on the right, they're extracting sea salt from the surface, they're cultivating kelp and scallops. And then these ocean farms reduce food insecurity, and also they reduce overfishing. And so it's a low cost, zero input, easily scalable solution that really is a climate adaptive livelihood option. And it really is actually, the seaweed itself also is taking out the methane emission and sequestering carbon to help mitigate ocean acidification. So it's a very, it's elaborate, but it kind of really fits into one of sort of, if we look back here, it really fits into some of the kinds of solutions. For example, this building a healthy climate adaptation and resilience, and ensuring healthy and equitable transition to a clean economy. This idea of retrofitting ceilings started sort of in Cape Town, Africa. This is really a broader solution on policies on human health and the environment. And basically, Cape Town's climate can be moist and cold, and making its residents susceptible to TB. Oh, yes, Matthew, I saw your hand come up.
Yeah. So just on the previous one, the
Yes.
previous slide, with the seaweed and the are they oyster? Is it an oyster farm or whatever it is? So I understand that it's a good thing. What would you say is the specific health benefit there?
So the health benefit is the access to fresh food. So it's actually
okay, yeah, got it. Yeah, okay, that's fair enough.
The lack of food, but it's still you're still growing food in the ocean, right? So the food is so that I think is the benefit of it.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and Greta.
Yeah, just a quick one. You had mentioned the kelp as a way of harnessing the CO2 and capturing it. But if you harvested the kelp, then wouldn't it then go back out? I mean, is it something that has to remain as is a forest kind of idea?
It is, but it is renewed as it goes. So it's harvested for food and other products, but it's also renewed. So basically, it's a cycle that keeps the kelp in the water. It's a kelp farm in the water, basically.
And that captures it, and it doesn't release it when it's harvested. The CO2.
No,
okay,
it doesn't. No, yeah. It's a great question, though. Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't had folks ask that question before, so. And because you're reharvesting, it does, in fact, continue to keep. So it doesn't release it into, when you harvest it doesn't release that back into the atmosphere, but it continues to capture the carbon in the ocean. Andre.
Yes, hi, I wanted to unmute. This is really engaging and a very thorough exposure to how climate and health are related. I can only speak from it as sort of an investor, so it's a subset of the issues that you raise, but natural capital and biodiversity have entered the conversation in my industry and in my business. And what's interesting is that now there are committees organized around looking at how companies interact with nature and how they're harvesting sort of the resources of nature in a way that it can be accounted for. And some of the things that are coming out, for example, is that water and water issues are just top of mind with sort of the ability of forecasting global warming 30, 50 years into the future. There are predictions where areas of the world are going to become even more stressed, South Africa, India, other places. And so now the connection is to sort of make that part of the business, or the capital allocation part of the business, aware of this sort of linkage that otherwise is just thought of as hurricanes. Okay, climate change is hurricanes, but there's so much more to it. So it's just really nice to see the work you're doing.
Thank you. I have to say, water issues are, I don't spend adequate time on this here. And I think that's such an important point, because water issues are probably going to be one of the most upfront and center issues, if not already, in a lot of regions. And I do think at some point our center is collaborating with some folks who are doing water work, but that connection between water and health has not been as magnified as it should. Or as, I mean, it's logical, it's there, but it just doesn't receive the same kind of face time as other topics. So I do appreciate you mentioning that. Great. Okay, so I'll quickly turn to this because this is such a neat solution. And it was, what I love about this solution also is that sort of where it originated from. So it really is because the residents, because of the climate being moist and cold, making its residents susceptible to all sorts of illnesses like TB, and also, especially in low-income neighborhoods, housing often lacks proper insulation. And the city realized that by focusing on retrofitting ceilings, they could improve the health of the community and the energy efficiency of the buildings, reducing the amount of fossil fuel that was used to heat homes by up to 74% in the winter. And to date, the city has retrofitted more than, I think it's now up to almost 15,000 homes. And it's estimated that total impact of these retrofits will save approximately 7,400 tons of carbon dioxide each year from entering the atmosphere. And the city's subsidy regulations for new income housing were changed to include properly insulated ceilings. And so residents are reporting significant improvements in health and also financial burdens because the upgrades led to significant reductions in energy and in healthcare costs. So what I love about this is that it sort of was a top-down mandate from the city to create these insulated roofs, which had multiple benefits, including health benefits, which really stood out significantly. And then I just want to also turn to sort of a more simple solution. And this is really where sort of my interest and heart lies, is that first of all, health professionals have always been on the front lines of advocating for the solutions to the world's most pressing public health concerns. And the health science community has a vital role to play in tackling climate change. And so we do need to make sure that all of our learners at all levels of the education continuum understand and know about their role and responsibility in combating the climate crisis in general, the health effects of the climate crisis. And that's why education is a core solution to the crisis. And if we look back at the history of education throughout time, it's pointed to the fact that education plays a very important role in instigating societal change. So we know that, for example, from years of sort of history of education studies, that higher ed is linked to increased tolerance, prosperity, civic engagement, democracy, and educational institutions also play a critical role in leading that transformative change in society. And so I just want to put out there that we want to make sure that our healthcare providers, our healthcare institutions are providing an education that prepares our learners for what we call environmental accountability, which is the idea that our institutions' education, research, service activities develop, promote, and protect environmentally sustainable solutions to address the health concerns of the communities they serve. So to give you an example, we are working with teachers now, high school teachers, to really raise awareness around climate anxiety, which is experienced by a lot of young people now. We're educating teachers to teach about the health impacts to their learners. We are working with the schools of medicine and pharmacy and dentistry and nursing to increase education, because there's no education at all about the climate crisis in any of these settings. So increasing education there. And then also making available to our community members the latest research for them to be able to protect themselves. So this is the mini medical school for the public that we ran out of the center in collaboration with UCSF, where we offered a series of hands-on latest and greatest in knowing what's going on in these areas. For example, healthcare of climate, shared solutions, climate psychiatry, things like that, so that communities can prepare themselves and be knowledgeable about the things that impact them. And so with that, I quickly want to turn to the center. So as I mentioned, our center is a growing team. We've got 2 founding co-directors, Sherry Weiser and myself. We've got a managing director, 4 staff, and 10 faculty co-chairs throughout all of the UC schools. Our home is at UCSF, but we have representation way beyond UCSF and about 100 faculty affiliates across all. And we have students sort of rotating through our center and working on various projects. This is kind of giving you a sense of the kinds of things that we work on. So really, like I said, working on education. I talked about the faculty training. We have a new course on climate justice. We just pushed out wildfire patient care materials in 3 different languages to help prepare communities for that, for wildfire impacts. And then also working globally, we have a Sustainable Development for Health Fellowship in Kenya. Policy, a lot of work with lawmakers, helping educate them about the research on the climate health impacts and how they can make changes. We have a seed grant program that we allocated, and we had some really neat seed grants that we gave, including one on Indigenous health and protecting the environment, and also through Indigenous ways of thinking, and then one that had to do with urban forestry in Los Angeles. I mean, we're building a climate and health data dashboard to kind of give a sense of where the hot pockets are for preparing communities for climate and health impacts. And then we also do a lot of work in terms of making sure that our healthcare sector is becoming climate smart. So a lot of our hospital operations are hugely impactful and affect the environment. So for example, working with our anesthesiologist, who have begun to think about the enormous greenhouse gas potential for some of our anesthetic gases, and how you begin to train anesthesiologists to use the gases that are less environmentally damaging. And then starting a clinical sustainability fellowship that really helps think about waste and emissions in the healthcare system. And so what can you do as an individual about climate change, and where can health fit into this dialogue? And I think a couple of things I want to say that's very simple. You know, I really talked about sort of this idea of, you know, getting cars off the road and walking for clean air, which has health benefits and also benefits for the environment, healthier diets. We do a whole course and section on balancing things like red meat production, and which also have health benefits when you stop consuming as much red meat. And also red meat is a huge methane producer, which then affects the climate. You know, things like walking also have been shown to have mental health impacts. And then simple things like planting trees, you know, like taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. We already know that there's so many studies that show about the health benefits of trees, ranging from things like, you know, not just cleaning the air, but also creating spaces that are positive for mental health, and all sorts of other health outcomes. And so I'm going to stop after this slide. I want to leave you with a way to think about how we answer this never-ending question of what should I do? I don't know if you have seen this particular graphic by Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson. She's a marine biologist and the founder of this non-for-profit think tank called the Urban Ocean Lab. And she raises awareness that makes a powerful case for nurturing a welcoming, connected, and leader-led climate community that really focuses on justice and the planet and saving it. And with her framing here, what we see here is she says that as you think about what change you can bring, she asks us to think about, okay, what are the things that we're good at? So what are the special skills? Like, what's your magic? So when I think about mine, for example, my skills are that I'm an educational researcher. I think often about equity, and I think about climate. And so that's the special sort of skill that I bring to this. Then she asks us to think about what brings us joy professionally. So what gets you up in the morning? You know, neglecting joy will lead to burnout. So, you know, for me, it's getting up in the morning and thinking about climate action. And then the third part is, you know, what is the work that needs to be done? For me, it's what's the work that needs to be done in healthcare, because I sit at the intersection of health and education. And so I think about needs to be done, where can I bring sort of my skills together. And as you take a moment to think about it, at the intersection of these three circles is where we can really think about where we can make our biggest impact. So I wanted to leave you with that. And I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you all. And I welcome any questions that you might have.
I've got one actually that just I think is really interesting. I think the way that you frame, well, the question may not be interesting, but it resonates for me is that here in London, we've had a whole crisis really, because the mayor who's an asthma sufferer, has decided that he wanted that the fact that all the nitrous dioxide is in the air means that we're going to have to drive less, and he's introduced this ultra low emissions zone, and it's had a huge impact. But I think it's been successful because he said that so many children have died from asthma, and people will die from it. It's completely changed the narrative around what is a sustainability problem, because it's put health right at the very front. So that's something I think your talk made me reflect upon. The other thing I just wanted to say very quickly was with regard to Andre's comments, that I've been thinking a lot about, in terms of the investment community, what do you see as a sort of hierarchy of what are the tipping points? And I suppose the tipping points and the hierarchy of things that need to happen in this space on health will change from region and from city to city, and it's perhaps a local question, but I find myself thinking about that. So I don't know if you'd like to respond to either of those questions.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. I did not realize the history of the low emission zones was what you described, because I've seen it when I've visited, but I didn't know that. So that's really interesting. And I think you are exactly right that the health dialogue just makes it so much more personal and so much more meaningful, because it's right there. It's you, it's your children, it's your family, it's, your parents, whatever it is. So it does really, it can play a huge role in communication around climate change. I think your second point, I have spent a little bit of time thinking about this, but I wouldn't say I have the best answer in terms of investments. Where we are, the intersection that we're at, and there's just so much going on in the world. A lot of this dialogue is kind of, it's there, but it's not up front and center because everything else that's happening. And so I do think communication is one investment area that we don't often think about. And I know that seems like a strange thing to say, but communication research, miscommunication, it's taken on a life of its own. And as we think about the changes that we want to bring about and how do we make sure that important messages are not lost, one of the areas feels to me like this focus on communication strategies that help educate, that help promote, that help protect seems very critical. In terms of technologies that focus on health, there's such a vast array of things that are coming out. Like some of the examples I showed, there's so many more. There's like apps that have been created to help folks protect themselves during heat events, things like that. A lot of emergency response type of technology. So there are things that are growing. And I'm not sure I know where all of those are going to land. I think some of those are very nascent.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
I think.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Hello. Just I think it's Matthew covered one part of my the question that I plan to ask. One thing is, for example, I'm used to do disaster resilience. Disaster resilience is have a before planning, before you to avoid, and then you have it when you are in any time. is happening, or during the process and after the process to learn or retrofit the I saw your training plan, preparing like a resiliency in the hospital healthcare. Healthcare is one of the key health is one of the key system in our field of disaster resiliency that we need to the first priority. Let's say ambulance need to move. Communication, if the communication is you need to send a plane to send, let's say, hotspot batteries to the people to like in a war zone. Okay, but for example, you have other impact in the mental health. So that's what where we are globally in that before it's happening or during the it's starting or during the process that the disasters or the disaster, we can say that the global change, the global warming is a disaster, global disaster that is exploding any location. People trying to mitigate, but avoiding is almost, I believe, is almost difficult at this point. Where we are in that disaster. And the second point of the investment, do we have any model that can quantify that? For example, the impact, that impact can be transferable in a kind of investment or a kind of asset that it can put in Wall Street, a kind of asset bonus that can be like let's say I produce something in those countries that are not affected by the global warming, but then those equities, that those investments, those can be like a equity or some kind of penalization or some kind of incentive. Let's say I like incentives, so to reduce that and transfer that in a benefit to mitigate the impact of global warming. I mean, one is bonus, but how this is concerned, and the other is in the level of disaster. In the disaster process, we are. Yeah. And I like the training. I think you maybe I'm not especially in this area, but I think you need to have something that mental health when you have a disaster. They have a field that study the PTSD and the process of dealing with disaster. So we are in that. In some locations in the world, very probably most of the location will be in that level. So the two questions, I don't know if he nailed it well because I'm not very good. Yeah.
This is, yeah, you're totally right. And it is true. So I definitely, so in terms of resilience, you are correct that there's the pre, the during, and the post, and resilience comes in sort of at every intersection of those. I think sometimes, and I don't know if it's the term resilience or if it's the idea behind it, a lot of communities throughout the world are feeling a little resentful of the term resilience because they feel like it is putting them in a position where it's kind of on them to be resilient, like depending on what your resources are, that you have to kind of figure it out on your own. And that is not necessarily the way it should be, right? Like there should be governments, there should be public health departments that are all working towards helping support communities during difficult times. And so I completely agree with you. And I really do agree about the mental health impacts because, I mean, not only are we seeing the mental health impacts during disasters, which are very frequent, we're not preparing them. So one project we have is, it's not necessarily a disaster preparedness, it's more of a clinical climate emergency preparedness where physicians are working with communities and preparing them for the physical impacts, the mental impacts of climate change. So there was a fire in Oakland last night, and it basically started off in the hills right between the homes and the school. So parents could not go to the school to get their kids, and the kids were it was temporary, everything was okay, but nonetheless, like just imagine like if that went on and what that meant for the kids who couldn't get to be seen by their parents. There's this fire coming at the homes and the school. So you're totally right about that. And I think those are all really important ways forward. And I'll make a plug for, we have a session next week that we're hosting, not next week. Yeah, no, not next week. day after tomorrow. Sorry, it's all wrong. On the current mental health impacts of climate change, and we have a speaker who has released a book that's going to be talking about the research that she's done in this area and how we need to prepare for it globally. Anyway, so thank you, Ashley. Oh,
The
good now.
the model.
I'm
Sorry,
here.
the model of a the model to quantify the equity, but this could be very long to discuss about that. But this is a very good point, and Matthew mentioned a little bit to connect the how the investor can have a benefit or can have an incentive, or like at the how quantify that if I invest in this, okay, the impact to that I need to transfer to the people who will be as indirectly affected by death. For example, halving the ocean or affecting the like oil, for example, affecting the communities. That, for example, how to transfer that is something that could be an entire paper, probably.
yeah, it's true. But very valuable, though. Yeah, very valuable.
No, that's okay. It's okay. Sorry to interrupt. So somebody asked a question.
Actually, please go ahead. It was more of a comment, really, rather than a question. And like, I studied health so I studied communication, but my focus was health communication. And what I was thinking about in your presentation is how, you know, we really need to we need to educate the public and re-educate the public about how at climate events, and how do we do this in a sensitive way where we're not desensitizing people to the problem, so we're bombarding them with climate messages so much that they actually start to lose interest, or two, like you're bombarding them with messages and actually people just start going, well, I'm just going to keep driving my car despite all of this regulation about, you know, ultra low emission zones and the negative impacts of, I don't know, burning fossil fuels. And I suppose I was also thinking, you know, we do, like, I remember growing up in California in our public school system, we were taught like stop, drop, and roll, all this health messaging around like things that happen in California quite frequently, like earthquake drills, fire drills, and how that kind of stuff that needs to happen probably here in the UK. The United Kingdom has had some of the hottest summers on record recently. We've had like massive fires here, and some of that learning actually we need to bring here to keep ourselves safe. That's all I wanted to say, and thank you.
Yeah, no, I tell you, communication is I hear you. There is going to be resistance to communication, but I really do think like working on communication is going to be the next wave that really is important and critical. And it's not just gonna help with climate. It's going to help with all of the miscommunication or all of the change that's needed in all other areas, like, you know, stuff that's floating around on social media that's, you know, fake or not, you know, like things like that. So there is a lot of synergy there. And the National Academy of Medicine has put out, and I can share this with Romy or Christina. It's a beautiful new guide, and they have a video that goes with it that really talks about what we currently understand about communication and its impact on change. And so it's a beautiful piece, and it brings together a lot of cutting edge researchers who've kind of put their ideas together for where it needs to go, where the world needs to go next. And so it's quite a compelling document. How it's going to happen, I don't know, but at least we know the evidence is there. So
it could be the good AI and the bad AI. The bad
Yes.
AI is the fake news, and the good AI, because this is something in our community, in computer science, we are trying to debate now. We have a big data center here that will be like uses the AI. The AI is the demon, but can be used for the good because it can be detecting the bad or reducing the cascading effect of the fake news is, for example.
Yes, very true. Very true.
Thank you, everyone. And I know we're having such an amazing conversation, but just to say that we are at time, and I would love to ask Professor Teherani if you have a bit of more time, if anybody else would like to ask their questions. Otherwise, what is an amazing way to reach you so people can send their questions over and have a chance to talk to you if you do not have more time?
I'm sorry, all I do have to jump off because I do have to go to something else. I'm going to put my email address in here, and I can, Donna, maybe we can go with your question first, and maybe I can do one more.
Thank you.
I will. Thank you very much. While you're putting your email in there, I'll go ahead and apologies that I missed the introduction session because I was stuck in the tube, but I am very interested in what you're talking about because I'm on week 5 of a venture builder. So I'm a co-founder with a group of a disparate group of other 68 other people, both from healthcare professions and environment, and then people like me who come from a commercial background. We're brought together to form startups in our cohort and the overlap between health and the environment. So this is exactly this space. So I'm super interested. And they actually did present to us during the sort of boot camp intensive learning, the Venn diagram of where you want to operate. But on top of that, there's a lens of it has to be a commercial proposition. So thank you, Matthew. That was going to be my first question, what you asked. So asked and answered. And then the second lens, or the 5th circle for me, for the Venn diagram, has to be something that shows traction within a very short time frame of we go to investment committee and ask for pre-seed funding in March. So like I need ideas that impact this space, but I need to show traction really quickly, so that like a lot of the things seem very interesting, like air pollution, etc. But it's like, I don't know, these are long-term plays. So I'm wondering, as a subset to any of this, like particularly within communications, because of course with someone from a marketing background, that's sort of my area. I love it. Is there anything that you see would have less resistance, that people are already primed, and that we could make some traction within the next 5 months or so?
I would have to think about that. There are, I would have 5 months. And what are you thinking of in terms of timeline? Like, what do you consider fast?
So we have to have validated the problem and formed a company by late February. So validated with, interviews, etc., with either if it's like consumers, or, if it's with clinicians, with the clinicians, that there is in fact a problem that's a real problem. And then we would show how we're going to work on it and how it's going to be commercial. So we don't have to solve the problem or have the solution 100% built, maybe even on paper, the MVP, the sketch of the solution, but we have to show traction, that it is provable. We have evidence that it's a problem and people accept it. So my concern is some of the things people don't accept that it's a problem yet, right? It's not a known problem, but it is an actual problem. And that just seems like not one for this program that I'm on, that someone should solve it, but it shouldn't be me. Yeah. If you see what I mean. Yeah.
Give me a little bit of time to think about that, because I think that I can think of some things that could sort of meet that criteria, or at least parts of things, but I have to look to sort of see if that actually, I have to talk to, I think, a couple of colleagues to see if that actually is the truth. So yes, I'm happy to circle back on that.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, I think I would love to, first of all, thank you, Professor Teherani. This was such an amazing conversation and really enlightening. I think everyone really
thank you very much.
And your presentation was amazing. So
Thank you
you
very much.
Can we have the slides to share with the audience?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, happy to send it. I'll send it along.
Okay, amazing. And yeah, and please grab Professor Tehrani's email. It's right here in the chat if you have any questions. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you soon again on our next Sustainability Talk series.